Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun this morning. Hasn't it been good? Well, can you respond a little bit more enthusiastically? I mean, a big shout out to George. He's 15 and he's doing all those links like a professional. I'm just kind of amazed, wondering where he got the ability to talk from. And a big shout out to all the worship group. That was great, guys. But I was watching Annie on the drums. Wasn't that guy good? Oh. That's multitasking, to play drums and smile at the same time. I couldn't do that. But I'm sorry to say a word of judgment and condemnation to Andy Barclay Watts. Andy playing golf on the Lord's Day. That would not have been allowed in the church I grew up in. Oh, seriously, on the subject of the church I grew up in that church tradition, we never talked about people. Am I too loud, by the way? Is there too much on the mic? Is that okay? Well, okay, good. We never talked about people coming to faith. Nor did we talk about people making a decision or accepting Jesus into their heart. In my Sally Army church tradition, people got saved. And my old dad, who loved generosity, would sometimes shake his head sadly and say, the trouble with too many Christians is that when they get saved, all their money gets saved as well. Generosity, as John and Ellie has already pointed out to us, is a vital aspect of living fruitfully. And we all love it. We love to see generosity in others. We love it when we're on the receiving end of generosity. But it's not always easy to practice generosity ourselves. Now, of course, there are moments when our emotions are so stirred by hearing of someone's need that anybody whose heart is not made of stone is immediately prompted to be generous. But a spontaneous gesture of generosity is one thing. I want to ask this morning, how do we cultivate a posture of generosity? You know what I mean? A gesture is something you do at one point. Posture is how you walk, how you talk, how you conduct yourself every day of your life. And I'm going to suggest to you, in fact, I'm going to do more than suggest, I'm going to tell you that I think there are 4 things that are vital to a posture of generosity. The first is that you need to discover liberty from self. The second is that you need clarity of mind. The third thing is that you need a strategy for action. And the third is that you then practice generosity in all things. Let me begin at the beginning. I don't think you can possibly be generous until you have discovered liberty for yourself. Think of it just like this.
The world says, never say die. But Jesus says, you must die. Imagine a table. Put on that table everything you want to give to God. Your time, your money, your job, your home, your friends, your family, your pastimes. You need a bigger table. You seem to be giving everything to God. But the one thing God wants is still missing. He wants you. You must clamber onto the table yourself. But the world says, never say die. The world calls us to a standard of living. Prove yourself. Help yourself. Please yourself. Spoil yourself. You deserve that new iPhone. You deserve a once-in-a-lifetime holiday. You deserve a new kitchen with an island. And you deserve a smart TV with a huge screen. Never mind that others are hungry. Never mind that others are lonely. Never mind that others are naked. You only live once. Enjoy it. Get out and live. But Jesus says, you must die. If anyone wants to come with me, they must forget self and take up their cross every day and follow me. If anyone wants to come my way, they must shoulder the cross and walk through the mob every day of their life. If you won't be seen dead with me, then you won't be seen alive with me. We'll do anything rather than die. We'll give time. We'll give money. We may even volunteer for overseas missions. But we don't want to die. But Jesus says, why are you saving your life? What are you saving it for? Look at it this way. Moths will eat your clothes. Rust will eat your car. Inflation will eat your savings. Time will eat your health. And death will eat your body. If that was your life, then you wasted it. You have one life to spend. And you must spend each day as it comes. It's date stamped. It won't keep. If you try to save your life, wrap it in cotton wool, never take a knock, never take a risk, then you lose it. But if you spend your life on me, says Jesus, if you throw in your life with mine, then you'll live. And that, I think, is real life.
There you have it. There you have it. We need to be freed from the tyranny of self if we are to experience the liberty of generosity. We need to be freed from the tyranny of self. That's why Jesus says we must die. Not because he wants to be cruel, not because he wants to hurt us, but he wants to set us free from self. Second thing, liberty from self, clarity of mind. I'm not sure whether I've ever told you this before, but it's the kind of story that delights a Scotsman's heart. Some years ago, I was visiting a friend, and we prayed together at the end of a conversation, and then he suddenly said to me, out of nowhere, Chick, I need to tell you that God's going to give you some money, but the reason he's going to give it to you is because you know how to give it away. I didn't think very much of it. But later that week, we had a guy visiting us who was in training for the Anglican ministry. He wasn't earning any money. And I said to Margaret, and I tell you the amount only because of what happened next, Margaret, we ought to give him some money. And we wrote out a check for £100. Before he left, the post came through the letter box with a check that somebody had decided to send us for £300. A little later, a pension that I wasn't expecting to get, I was suddenly going to get. And I thought, wow, that's Dave's prophetic word. God's going to give you some money because you know how to give it away. You haven't heard the best of the story. I got a letter. You heard of heir hunters, you know, people who, there are lots of legacies in Britain that have never been claimed, and there are companies that specialize in trying to trace the relatives and get the money released, and they make a bit of money off it. We got a letter from such an heir hunter naming a woman that we'd never heard of in our life. A lady, God bless her, called Alberta Finlayson. We have subsequently discovered that she was probably a cousin of my husband. This is not one of those moments of dramatic confession. That was a slip of the tongue. I've never had a husband in my life. I've had the same wife for 53 years. Wait, will you stop it? I need to get moving on. She was a cousin of my dad's. To cut a long story short, Mrs. Alberta Finlayson, married late in life, had no children. Her husband died before her. Before he died, he taught her how to play the stock exchange, which she used to do for fun every day. She obviously had no idea how much money she had because she died without leaving a will. So they tried to trace all the nearest relatives. I tell you, Mrs. Alberta Finlayson has a fortune that runs into millions. Now, before you suddenly think you're going to send me letters because I'm incredibly wealthy, there were 25 of us benefited from it. But here's the really interesting thing. It came with a promise and a warning from God. God's going to give you some money, but the reason He's going to give it to you is because you know how to give it away. So what we realized with this sum of money, which, by the way, is less than a Premier Division footballer would earn in a week, but it's still a heck of a lot of money to us, what we learned was it doesn't actually really belong to us. We have it in trust. And part of that trust is to give it away as generously as we can. Clarity of mind. Listen, and God is able to bless you abundantly, 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. Now, He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. Why? You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. That's why we have what we have. You've got money so that you can pay the bills, so that you can feed your family, so that you can have a little treat occasionally, and so that you can give away as much of it as possible. That's the bottom line. All we have comes from God. Now, you've got to get your mind clear on that. There's an advert that's often in the Sunday Times at the moment for one of the Patek Philippe watches. And they've got a really clever line. It says, it's always a picture of a dad with a little boy or a mum with a little girl. And the line always is, you never own a Patek Philippe. You hold it in trust for future generations. You and I do not own our money, our houses, our cars. We have them in trust. And we've got to be generous with them. I need to move on. So what did I say? You need 4 things. Liberty from self. You've got to die to self. You need a clarity of mind. I don't own things. It's not mine in any ultimate sense. It's God's. You need a strategy for action. Now, how can we find a strategy that will help us? I mean, where on earth could you possibly find a strategy to help you be generous? Oh, Deuteronomy 14:22. Be sure to set aside 1/10 of all your fields produce each year. The biblical principle of tithing. Now, I've heard some people say it's legalistic tithing. No, it isn't. It's the bottom line that you start from. It's the bottom line that you start from. When you systematically get used to living, the maximum money I will ever have to live on will be 9/10 of my income. When you realize that, it actually liberates you to give more away. There is something wonderful about systematic giving. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. I love this. Paul's been dealing with great and mighty issues of theology. And then he says, now about the collection for the Lord's people. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Do you see what he's saying? If you leave it to the last minute, oh, goodness me, we need to put something in the offering. You're scrabbling. If systematically you are setting aside God's portion, well, it's all God's portion. He's just such a generous God. He says you can actually take care of the other 9/10. I think I've told you this before. My old dad, my generous old dad, was a coal miner. 51 years. He worked underground for about 49 of those. In those days, people didn't get paid into the bank. He would come home on a Friday morning. He worked night shift. He would come home on a Friday morning with a little brown envelope, and he and my mum would sit. They would sit at the kitchen table, and they would open that little brown envelope, and it would all be put on the table, and there was a little dish that sat on the mantelpiece. It was called the Lord's dish. And 1/10, before any bills were paid, any food was bought, would be put in the Lord's dish and put on the mantelpiece. I kid you not, I grew up thinking that every family had a Lord's dish. I subsequently discovered that a lot of Christians don't have a Lord's dish. And that was just the baseline for their giving. It wasn't legalistic. There were always people having meals in our house. It wasn't until a few years ago that I heard the story from Jim McCluskey. You don't know Jim McCluskey. Jim McCluskey, you have to know the town I came from. It's a really hard boozing town. Bellsale is known locally as Dodge City. It's a hard boozing town. And a couple of young guys got saved, got their lives turned around. My dad, I said he was always working night shift, but at that time, he was on what was called back shift, 2 to 10. And he would come home and eat his dinner at 11 o'clock at night. And I only discovered a few years ago that my mum would invite Jim McCluskey and another guy, George, said, oh, come and see us about 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9. Charlie will be home from the pit fairly soon, and you can have a bit of dinner with him. I mean, in Scotland, people eat dinner at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. It's a disgrace for a Scottish person to go to bed on the same day they got up. But Jim McCluskey, hard-drinking guy that he was, he said, do you know what? We only realized later that your mum and dad did that to keep us out of the pub on a Friday night. I got to eat dinner with your dad, he said. See, I think when you tithe, it's one of the crucial things that gives you a strategy so that generosity isn't just a gesture, but it begins to become a posture. So I need to finish. Generosity in all things. So what have we said? Liberty from self, clarity of mind, a strategy for action, and then you can be generous in all things. 2 Corinthians 9, God is, I've read this to you before, I'm reading it again, God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. Where should I be generous? Oh, hospitality. Hebrews 13, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters, and do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Hey, we've been limited. We've been shut in because of COVID. One of the things I hope that we rediscover as soon as we can after the limitations on us are lifted is to be hospitable again. There's nothing nicer than being invited for a meal. There's nothing nicer than sharing food together. Hospitality is a Christian value. Somebody once said about Jesus that in Luke's gospel, Jesus is always either on his way to a meal, he's in the middle of having a meal, or he's just had a meal and he's going somewhere else. Be generous with your time. I find that one difficult. You've mentioned that I've been writing, and Margaret's the one who suffers because I just guard my time and I have to remind myself, people matter more than anything I will ever write. And maybe the hardest one, because we talked about money, but the hardest one is forgiveness. Then Peter came to Jesus, Matthew 18:21, and said, Lord, how many times shall we forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? I mean, Peter's feeling really generous. I'll do it 7 times. And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Keep forgiving until you lose count. Hey, let me finish with 2 things. Let me share with you the best offertory prayer I have ever heard in my life. You know, when the plate goes round and we're giving in the offering, I heard somebody pray, Lord, you know how much we earn and how we earn it. You know how much we spend and how we spend it. And you know how much we've given and how we've given it. And on my radio show every Friday, which is a lot of fun, and I do hope you'll listen in occasionally on Premier Christian Radio, but I always try to sign off with the same words. And I'll sign off with them this morning. God is good. Life is a gift. So be grateful. Be graceful. And be generous. Hallelujah.